What's up YouTube? This is Devi, aka Deviant Dreamers, and I'm back with the penultimate video in our Gwent Tips and Tricks series. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the monster faction in Gwent in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. But before we do that, I wanted to extend thank yous to everyone who has been watching our series thus far. I am eternally grateful for all of your likes, shares, comments, and all of the feedback that I get from you. As with all of the previous videos in this series, today we'll be talking about some of the strengths of the monster faction, as well as some weaknesses that you might be able to use to your advantage. And with that, let's get started. First and foremost, let's talk about the specific faction ability of the monster deck. The monster faction is all about strength in numbers. The faction ability of the monster deck is that one of the units you play in any particular round will carry over to the next and stay on the battlefield. This is of course helpful in keeping a small lead over your opponents at any given time. If you can get your opponents to play a surplus of their cards in either round 1 or round 2, what we consider bleeding their hand, you could win in a round 3 with very little effort. Next, let's talk about the leader abilities of the monster faction. These 5 Eredin cards will allow you to double the strength of all of your spy cards, restore a card from your discard pile to your hand, double the strength of close combat units, discard 2 cards and then draw 1 card of your choice, and pick any weather card to play instantly. Now, in my personal opinion, these leader cards can be kind of a hit or a miss in the monster faction. They're very situation specific. For example, Eredin the Treacherous, which allows you to double the strength of all spy cards on the battlefield, may not be helpful if you have no spy cards in your deck as a monster faction. Additionally, Eredin Commander of the Red Riders, which allows you to double the strength of your close combat units, can seem helpful at first glance. However, opponents playing against a monster faction will typically know that a lot of monster cards are in fact close combat cards. Therefore, if your opponent has something like a Biting Frost card or a Scorch card, you might actually risk losing all, if not most, of your points in the close combat row. Based solely on these leader abilities, I would consider the monster faction to be particularly strong against any non-spy faction, such as the Scoia'tael faction or the Skellige faction. Now let's talk about some of the specialties of the monster faction. One of the primary focuses of this deck is, as I said earlier, strength in numbers. Therefore, there are a lot of cards with the muster ability. However, it is important to keep in mind that some of these muster cards are in fact low power cards, and those that are stronger are of course close combat cards. So this deck is very susceptible to special cards such as Scorch or Biting Frost. But if played wisely, perhaps by using lower value cards first, in order to try and tease these counters out of the opponent's deck, these muster cards can be quite powerful, especially with a Commander's Horn or a leader boost on top of that. In addition to muster cards, there are also some Agile cards within the monster faction. While the majority of the deck is overwhelmingly comprised of close combat units, there are a few siege units and range units to play as well. Some of the cards that I find particularly powerful from this faction are the Toad that you can get from Olgierd von Everick in the Heart of Stone DLC. Not only is it a 7-point card, but it's also a range card that gives you a Scorch ability on top of that. The Kairin is also a rather strong unit. It's an 8-point hero card that's also agile and gives a morale boost of +1 to all units in whichever row it's placed. While a lot of the muster cards, as mentioned earlier, can be powerful when grouped together, such as the vampires, because this deck does have a lot of close combat units, I would suggest you balance it out as much as possible, by not only including some range units and siege units of course, but also really focusing on a lot of weather cards, since obviously Biting Frost could be your worst enemy. As stated over and over again in this video, your 2 best friends if you are playing against the monster faction are Scorch cards and Biting Frost cards. As long as you have these 2 in your deck, you have a massive advantage against your opponent. And that's pretty much all there is to know about the monster faction. Straightforward, yes? If you have any additional tips or tricks when playing with or against the monster faction, feel free to let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Next time in our last Gwent tips video, we'll be tackling the Skellige faction. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I hope to see you soon.